Hey guys, tonight we tiptoe into sands of ancient Egypt, where love letters once fluttered like desert winds under starlit skies. Picture this. You're holding a brittle piece of papyrus, its edges frayed by centuries, and suddenly, the voice of someone desperate to win back their ex-lover rises from the page. It's intimate, it's raw, and honestly, you probably won't survive this emotional roller coaster without questioning your own text messages. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm always curious who's listening while the world sleeps. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in an ancient marketplace, the air thick with the scent of incense and freshly baked bread. A scribe sits cross-legged at his stall, dipping a reed pen into a pot of black ink. His hands move deliberately, crafting words meant to stir hearts or mend rifts. These weren't just casual notes. They were carefully constructed pleas designed to tug at emotions. The Egyptians believed that language had power, not just to communicate but to transform. Historians still argue whether these letters were purely personal or part of larger cultural rituals tied to festivals honoring gods like Hathor. Either way, every stroke of the pen carried weight. Imagine writing something so important it could change the course of your life or afterlife. You notice the scribe pauses, selecting each word with care. This wasn't about throwing shade or passive-aggressive jabs, though they did have those too. Instead, these letters often began with poetic overtures, invoking divine blessings or comparing the recipient to celestial bodies. "Your face shines brighter than the moon," one might read, laying the groundwork for reconciliation. Quirky tidbit alert. Some scholars suggest certain phrases were recycled because, well, let's face it, not everyone was Shakespeare. Ever sent a breakup text and regretted it instantly? Same energy, different millennium. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting golden hues over the Nile, you can almost hear the rustle of papyrus being rolled and tied with string. Love, it seems, has always been messy and beautiful. The scribe stall fade behind you as your focus shifts to the material itself. Papyrus. You're now tracing the journey of this humble plant, which grew abundantly along the Nile and became the unsung hero of ancient communication. Imagine walking through marshlands where workers harvested tall stalks, stripping them down to their fibrous cores. It wasn't glamorous work, but without it, those heartfelt pleas might never have reached their intended recipients. Historians still argue whether the choice of papyrus was purely practical or if its association with fertility and rebirth gave it symbolic significance in matters of love. You pause to consider how different things were back then. No smartphones, no email drafts, just sheets of pressed reeds waiting to carry your most vulnerable thoughts. Papyrus had texture, a faint earthy smell that lingered even after the ink dried. And unlike modern paper, it wasn't exactly forgiving. One wrong stroke of the pen could ruin hours of effort. Ever tried erasing something only to make it worse? Now multiply that frustration by ancient standards. Yet, despite its fragility, papyrus endured. In fact, some fragments survived thousands of years, buried beneath desert sands, preserving whispers of long-lost romances. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Not all papyrus was created equal. The finest sheets went to royalty and priests, while everyday folks made do with coarser versions. So if you were writing to win back your ex, you'd better hope you could afford quality materials, or risk looking like you didn't care enough. Scribes sometimes charged extra for premium papyrus, turning love into a bit of a luxury business. Think about it. Today we agonize over fonts and emojis. Back then, they stressed over fiber density and smoothness. Love letters, it seems, have always been high-stakes affairs. As you imagine rolling up your own letter, tied neatly with string, you can't help but wonder what secrets lie within these fragile scrolls. What stories would they tell if they could speak? Your thoughts drift upward, toward the heavens, as you meet Hathor, the goddess who reigned over love, beauty, and joy. She's often depicted with cow horns cradling a sun disk, a symbol of her nurturing yet radiant presence. You can almost picture her smiling down on lovers scribbling desperate pleas, her divine approval whispering through the rustle of papyrus. Historians still argue whether Hather's influence was more ceremonial or deeply personal, but one thing is clear. Invoking her name added weight to any romantic appeal. Imagine starting your letter with something like, "By the grace of Hather, may my words reach your heart." It wasn't just flattery. It was an invocation, a plea for divine intervention. The Egyptians believed that love wasn't solely human. It flowed from the gods themselves. Hathor wasn't the only deity in the mix, though she was certainly the star of the show when it came to romance. Osiris and Isis also made appearances, their own legendary love story serving as a template for devotion and reconciliation. Ever referenced a power couple in your own arguments? Same idea, ancient vibes. Now here's a quirky detail. Hathor had a darker side too. In some myths, she transforms into Sekhmet, a lioness goddess bent on destruction. If you didn't approach her with respect, or if your letter seemed insincere, you might find yourself praying for mercy instead of love. This duality made her both comforting and terrifying, much like love itself. Picture yourself kneeling before her statue, clutching your carefully written scroll, hoping she'd nudge your ex toward forgiveness. As you linger under her celestial gaze, you realize how deeply intertwined spirituality and romance were in ancient Egypt. Every word carried not just emotion but cosmic significance, tying mortal hearts to eternal forces. You're now standing in a dimly lit chamber, the air thick with the scent of aged stone and dust. Before you lies a fragment of papyrus, brittle and faded, its edges crumbling like whispers lost to time. This is no ordinary artifact. It's a window into heartbreak. You trace your fingers over the hieratic script, imagining the hand that once wrote these words, trembling with hope or despair. Historians still argue whether these letters were private outpourings or intended for public display during rituals. Either way, they offer a rare glimpse into the emotional lives of ancient Egyptians. One letter begins with a plea. "Why have you turned away from me? My heart aches as though bitten by a scorpion." Ouch! That's not just poetic. It's visceral. These weren't casual notes dashed off in haste. They were deliberate acts of vulnerability, crafted to evoke empathy and perhaps guilt. Ever sent a text saying, "I miss you," only to delete it 5 times before hitting send? Same energy, ancient stakes. Another fragment speaks of loneliness, so profound it feels like abandonment by the gods themselves. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe scribes occasionally included curses against rivals, subtly woven into the fabric of the letter. Talk about passive-aggressive divine intervention. As you sift through these remnants, you notice recurring themes, longing, regret, and almost desperate yearning for connection. One particularly poignant piece describes a writer's dreams of reconciliation, filled with images of shared meals and walks along the Nile. It's hauntingly familiar, isn't it? Love, loss, and longing transcend time, linking us to those who walked this earth millennia ago. You carefully place the fragment back, feeling the weight of its history. Each letter was a gamble, a leap of faith that words alone could bridge the chasm between two hearts. Now, you shift your attention to the ink itself, that magical concoction that gave life to words on papyrus. You're not just looking at pigment here. This is alchemy, a blend of art and science designed to stir emotions. The Egyptians didn't settle for plain old black or red. Their inks were infused with symbolic meaning. Historians still argue whether certain ingredients held mystical properties or were simply practical choices. But one thing's clear. Every drop carried intention. You watch as a scribe grinds charcoal into a fine powder, mixing it with gum arabic from acacia trees. This wasn't just about making the ink stick. It was about binding the writer's soul to the page. Red ink, derived from ochre, often signaled urgency or passion, while black conveyed solemnity and depth. Quirky tidbit. Some recipes included honey, believed to sweeten the recipient's heart toward the sender. Imagine drizzling a bit of sweetness into your breakup text today. Would it work? Probably not. But hey, ancient Egyptians were optimists. As you dip your finger into a pot of freshly mixed ink, you notice its texture. Thick yet fluid, alive under your touch. It's said that scribes sometimes whispered prayers or incantations while preparing their materials, believing the act of writing could invoke divine favor. Ever muttered a quick, "Please let this work," before hitting send on an important email? Same vibe. These inks weren't just tools. They were conduits of hope, despair, and everything in between. One particularly fascinating detail emerges. Some letters show traces of metallic compounds, hinting at experiments with shimmering effects. Was it vanity? Or did they believe sparkling words would catch the eye and heart of the reader more effectively? Either way, these tiny innovations remind us how much thought went into every stroke of the pen. Your focus now shifts to the scribes themselves, those unsung architects of ancient romance. You find yourself seated beside one as he hunches over his desk, brow furrowed in concentration. These weren't just glorified typists. They were artists, mediators, and sometimes even therapists. Historians still argue whether scribes acted purely as neutral transcribers or if they injected their own advice into the letters they penned. Either way, their role was far more intimate than we might imagine. Picture this. A young man approaches the stall, nervously clutching a draft of what he wants to say to his estranged lover. He stammers through his request, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The scribe listens patiently, nodding occasionally before offering subtle suggestions. Perhaps mention her kindness, he might advise, or recall that day by the river. It's easy to see how these professionals became de facto matchmakers, shaping not just words but outcomes. Ever asked a friend to help you craft the perfect apology message? Same concept, ancient execution. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes kept templates for common scenarios, breakups, proposals, reconciliations, all ready to be customized with personal details. Efficiency at its finest, though it does make you wonder how many lovers received eerily similar letters. Still, there's no denying the skill involved. A good scribe knew when to embellish and when to let raw emotion shine through. They understood pacing, tone, and the delicate balance between vulnerability and dignity. As you watch him roll up another finished letter, tying it with care, you realize these men, and occasionally women, held immense power. Their pens could mend fences or burn bridges. Love, it seems, has always been a collaborative effort. Now, your gaze falls on the symbols woven into these letters, delicate hieroglyphs and motifs that transform simple words into visual poetry. You notice lotus flowers blooming across the page, their petals unfurling like promises of renewal. The Egyptians didn't just write. They painted with meaning, each symbol a brushstroke on the canvas of emotion. Historians still argue whether these images were purely decorative or carried deeper layers of coded communication, but one thing is certain. They added weight to every phrase. Take the bee, for instance, a tiny glyph buzzing with significance. To the ancient Egyptians, bees represented industry, harmony, and even resurrection, including one in a letter might suggest, our love can rise again if we work together. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe lovers use specific combinations of symbols as secret codes, ensuring only the intended recipient fully understood the message. Imagine slipping an emoji into a text a day that only your ex would recognize. Same sneaky brilliance. You trace your finger over another recurring motif. The ankh, the symbol of life. Its loop top feels almost playful, yet its presence in a love letter carries profound implications. I want us to live again. It seems to whisper, bridging past regrets and future hopes. Ever try to say something so big in such a small space? These symbols did the heavy lifting, condensing complex emotions into a single stroke. As you study these intricate designs, you realize how much thought went into every detail. Each curve, each line, was chosen not just for beauty but for resonance. Love, for the Egyptians, wasn't just spoken. It was seen, felt, and lived through art. Your journey now takes you into the opulent halls of ancient Egyptian royalty, where love letters carried not just emotion, but political weight. You're standing in a grand chamber, watching as a scribe meticulously craft a missive on behalf of Pharaoh whose heart has been wounded by betrayal, or perhaps boredom. Royal romances were never simple affairs. They intertwined personal desire with dynastic duty. Historians still argue whether these letters revealed genuine affection or were carefully staged performances meant to reinforce power dynamics. Imagine a queen penning a plea to her estranged consort, invoking both divine favor and shared memories of palace banquets under starlit skies. Remember the feast by the Nile? She might write, blending nostalgia with strategy. These weren't just private appeals. They were public spectacles, preserved for posterity and often tied to larger narratives of succession and alliance. Quirky tidbit. Some royal letters included veiled threats alongside tender words, ensuring the recipient knew exactly what was at stake. Ever sent a text that started sweet, but ended with "we need to talk"? Same idea, bigger consequences. One particularly scandalous example involves a prince who attempted to win back his lover by promising extravagant gifts: golden amulets, perfumed oils, even exotic animals. It's hard not to draw parallels to modern gestures of grandeur, like sending flowers or booking a fancy dinner. Yet behind these lavish promises lay layers of calculation, each gift symbolizing something deeper about loyalty, status, or mutual benefit. As you leave the royal court behind, you can't help but marvel at how love remained both intensely personal and profoundly public. Even among kings and queens, matters of the heart carried universal truths. The air grows heavier as you delve into the darker side of love letters, those laced with curses and spells, where desperation turns to defiance. You're now in a shadowy corner of an ancient temple, watching a scribe etch angry invocations onto papyrus meant to harm rivals or bind ex-lovers. These weren't just words. They were weapons designed to manipulate fate itself. Historians still argue whether such practices were fringe superstitions or widely accepted customs, but their existence reveals how far people would go for love or revenge. Imagine writing something like, "May your name be erased from memory," or "Let no man look upon you with favor." Harsh? Absolutely. But in a world where immortality was tied to being remembered, these curses carried existential weight. Quirky tidbit. Some letters included hair or fingernail clippings, believed to amplify the spell's power through personal essence. Ever considered adding a lock of your own hair to a breakup text? Probably not. But ancient Egyptians had no qualms about going all in when emotions ran high. On the flip side, there were healing spells meant to mend broken hearts. One particularly fascinating fragment describes a ritual involving figurines soaked in honey and milk, symbols of sweetness and nourishment, placed under the writer's pillow to invoke dreams of reconciliation. It's oddly relatable. How many late-night scrolls have you made while hoping for closure? As you step away from this eerie chapter, you realize that love wasn't always gentle or poetic. Sometimes it was raw, messy, and downright vengeful, a reminder that human nature hasn't changed much over millennia. You now find yourself in a quieter moment, reflecting on the timeless advice embedded within these ancient letters. It's almost comforting to know that heartbreak, no matter how unique it feels, is as old as civilization itself. The Egyptians didn't just pour out their emotions. They also shared wisdom, nuggets of insight that still resonate today. Historians still argue whether this advice was meant to guide future generations or simply serve as personal mantras for the writers themselves. Either way, it bridges the gap between then and now. One letter offers a simple yet profound truth: patience is a healer of all wounds. Another encourages the writer to focus inward, saying, "Tend your own garden before seeking another's bloom." Ever scrolled through self-help blogs looking for answers after breakup? Same concept, ancient delivery. These snippets feel less like pleas and more like meditations, reminders that love requires growth from both parties. Quirky tidbit. Some letters included practical tips, such as suggesting the recipient take long walks by the Nile or surround themselves with friends during difficult times. Self-care isn't exactly a modern invention. What stands out most is a universal thread running through these words: resilience, whether advising patience, urging forgiveness, or simply acknowledging pain. These fragments offer a roadmap for navigating the labyrinth of love. They remind you that while emotions may evolve, the human experience remains strikingly consistent. As you sit with these echoes of the past, you can't help but feel a little less alone in your own struggles. Your thoughts drift toward the scholars who spent lifetimes deciphering these ancient love letters, their debates echoing through libraries and lecture halls. You find yourself seated in a modern study, surrounded by stacks of books and faded photocopies of papyrus fragments. Historians still argue whether these letters were genuine expressions of emotion or ritualistic performances meant to align with cultural norms. Was the writer truly pouring out their heart, or were they following a prescribed script? The question hangs in the air like incense smoke, lingering without resolution. Some experts lean toward authenticity, pointing to the raw vulnerability captured in the text. Why would someone include such personal details if it weren't real? They ask. Others counter that societal expectations may have dictated the tone and content, turning private anguish into public spectacle. Quirky tidbit. One theory suggests that some letters were never even sent but instead buried as offerings to gods, ensuring divine favor rather than human reconciliation. Ever written a scathing email, only to delete it later? Same catharsis, different endpoint. As you sift through the arguments, you notice how much rides on interpretation. Are we reading love letters, or carefully curated artifacts designed to project ideals of devotion? Perhaps both. Either way, these documents serve as mirrors, reflecting not just the lives of their creators, but also our own assumptions about love and communication. They challenge us to consider what's universal, and what's uniquely tied to time and place. You close the book in front of you, feeling the weight of unanswered questions. Sometimes, history doesn't give us clarity. It gives us wonder. Now, you shift your focus to the mundane details hidden within these letters. Tiny glimpses of daily life that ground their grand emotions in relatable reality. You're flipping through fragments, noticing mentions of market prices, weather patterns, and even household chores. These weren't just poetic declarations. They were snapshots of everyday existence, woven seamlessly into expressions of love. Historians still argue whether these details were intentional or incidental, but they offer a rare window into the texture of ancient Egyptian life. One letter casually references a shipment of grain, delayed by flooding along the Nile, while another laments the rising cost of linen garments. Ever complain about traffic or bad Wi-Fi in your own messages? Same principle, love doesn't exist in a vacuum. These asides remind us that even amid heartbreak or longing, life goes on. Quirky tidbit. Some letters include recipes for perfumed oils or instructions for brewing beer, hinting at shared domestic rituals. Imagine slipping a recipe for your famous lasagna into a heartfelt note today. Not so different when you think about it. What's striking is how these mundane elements humanize the writers. They weren't mythical figures frozen in time. They were real people navigating the same messy balance of emotion and practicality. A plea for reconciliation might be followed by a request to water the garden or check on the goats. It's oddly comforting, isn't it? Love, no matter how epic, always coexists with the ordinary. As you set down the fragment, you can almost hear the hum of daily life. The chatter of merchants, the clatter of pottery, the soft murmur of a lover's voice recounting their day. Your journey now leads you to the fragile archives where these letters have survived, tucked away in tombs and buried beneath desert sands. You're standing in a dimly lit storage room, surrounded by shards of papyrus encased in protective glass. The air feels heavy with history, each fragment carrying the weight of centuries. Historians still argue whether these documents were preserved intentionally as cherished mementos, or accidentally forgotten relics left behind by time. Either way, their survival feels like a miracle. You notice how delicate they are, edges crumbling at the slightest touch, ink faded to faint whispers. Some bear water stains from ancient floods, while others show signs of fire damage. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once discovered a bundle of letters wrapped in linen and sealed with resin, as if the writer hoped to protect them for eternity. Ever saved old texts or emails in a folder labeled "Do Not Delete"? Same sentiment. Ancient execution. What's remarkable is how much effort went into preserving not just the physical objects, but the emotions they carried. These weren't disposable notes. They were treasures, imbued with meaning that outlasted their creators. Yet, for every letter we found, countless others have been lost to decay, theft, or destruction. It's humbling to think about all the stories we'll never know. Letters erased by time, their words forever silent. As you step back from the display, you feel a pang of gratitude for what remains. Each fragment is a thread connecting us to lives lived long ago, proof that love endures, even when its vessels do not. Your thoughts now drift to the legacy of these ancient love letters, their echoes rippling through time to shape modern expressions of romance. You're seated at a cafe table, scrolling through your phone and noticing how much our digital confessions resemble those papyrus scrolls. We may have traded ink for pixels, but the core desires to connect, to be understood, to mend what's broken, remain unchanged. Historians still argue whether contemporary love letters owe a direct debt to ancient traditions, or if this continuity is simply human nature manifesting in new forms. Consider the parallels: emojis as hieroglyphs, voice notes as oral storytelling, even social media posts as public declarations of affection. Quirky tidbit: some modern dating apps now allow users to send personalized video messages, echoing the scribes who once tailored letters to suit their clients' needs. Ever poured hours into crafting the perfect text or email, agonizing over every word? Same energy, different tools. What's striking is how timeless themes persist. The longing, the vulnerability, the hope, they transcend eras and technologies. Even today, we invoke divine favor, though perhaps less literally, seeking signs or serendipities to guide our romantic endeavors. It's comforting to know that while methods evolve, emotions stay constant. Love remains both universal and deeply personal, a thread tying us to those who came before. As you close your laptop and glance out the window, you realize that ancient Egyptians weren't so different from us after all. Their stories remind us that love is, and always has been, a shared journey. The final whispers of this journey grow softer now, like the fading hum of a lullaby. You find yourself standing under a canopy of stars, the same ones that watched over ancient lovers as they penned their heartfelt letters. The night air is cool against your skin, carried with the faint scent of earth and water, remnants of the Nile's timeless flow. Your mind drifts back to the fragments you encountered, the tender words, the desperate pleas, the symbols etched with care, and you feel an overwhelming sense of connection. These voices in the past are not so distant. They linger in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, reminding us that love transcends time. The world slows around you, its edges blurring into stillness. The debates about authenticity, the rituals and the ink recipes, all of it fades into the background, leaving only the essence. Two hearts reaching for one another across the vast expanse of uncertainty. It doesn't matter whether those letters were sent or buried, read or forgotten. What matters is that they existed, proof of humanity's enduring desire to bridge divides and heal wounds. As the night deepens, the stars seem closer, their light stretching across millennia to touch you now. You think of Hathor smiling down, her presence gentle yet eternal, and the scribes who pour their souls into crafting words meant to stir emotions. Their efforts ripple through history, brushing against your own life like a soft breeze. Love, you realize, is both fragile and infinite, a paradox wrapped in tenderness. Let this thought carry you forward, cradling it like a precious scroll. Breathe deeply, feeling the calm settle over you, and allow these timeless stories to guide you toward restful dreams.